Revivals too often in MMA. If I had to make a video about the top 5 most amazing career comebacks, it will probably take me a week to research another to compile, and I'll probably just drop it entirely by the third. This sort of inspiring turnaround just isn't common, because once the game beat you down and put you in your place, you stay there. But if I had to pick one,
Robbie Lawler remains the welterweight champ!
From being kicked out by the UFC in his 20s to becoming a world champion in his 30s, Robbie Lawler put together the most inspiring career resurgence maybe of all time. But he had to believe buckets suffer about 1,000 hits to the head and burn years off of his fighting prime to achieve all of this. Those few years, however, that was the golden age for the welterweight division, led by the most unlikeliest welterweight champion in history. In 2002, a 20-year-old Robbie Lawler made his UFC debut. He was tough, fast, and ferocious, finishing all of his early opponents by knockouts, and he legitimately concussed Tiki Gossin to the point of delusion.
I got a cut. Yeah, they stopped because of a cut. Oh.
Was the first fight with Robbie Lawler, because Robbie was dangerous. So Nick took that shit talking to DEFCON 5.
At UFC 47, Robbie Lawler faced fellow prospect Nick Diaz. This was the fight of the night, and it had a glorious finish, launching the career of Nick Diaz. But at the expense of Lawler, after getting rocked by Nick, Robbie entered berserker mode to take his head off. But Diaz was the one who landed the knockout blow, a right hook on the chin, and Lawler was out cold. After the loss at UFC 47, Lawler moved up to 185 and lost his first fight against Evan Tanner, the future middleweight champion. That answer, the question: Lawler was good, but simply not good enough to become champion. Back then, your UFC records somewhat mattered, and after losing 2 fights back-to-back, Robbie was released from his contract. He wasn't done with the sport from the UFC. He jumped to King of the Cage International Fight League, Elite XL. And so on. Throughout all this time, Robbie Lawler remained at 185. And while he did find success, even becoming world champion at Elite XL.
Just pushing myself to the limits, getting better. I knew I was going to knock him out. I came back at the end of the second. They were like, you got to go after him. I go, I'm knocking him out. Plain and simple.
He was regarded as a bloated welterweight fighting at middleweights and a failed UFC prospect.
This is Lucia Riker with Showtime and Robbie Lawler.
When Strikeforce opened up, Robbie Lawler went over, and this is when and where he started living up to his moniker of ruthless. The middleweight division was a Shark Tank, and despite being undersized, while they fought everyone, he won some, lost some, even challenged Jacare for the title and losing effort. But those knockouts.
Ruthless Robbie Lawler! How? He gets the KO!
His run came to an end when Zuffa brought Strikeforce, and while Lawler was not able to capture gold in the now defunct promotion, he had built up a sufficient level of popularity with the fans, and upon his return to the UFC 10 years later, he was already one of the more popular fighters in the company by now. Lawler had been at this for more than a decade. He was an OG of the game, and his physical prom was not going to last long. He had a few years in him at most, and so Robbie Lawler got serious, finally moved down to 170, and set his sights on UFC gold. His return was perfect, as he brutalized the one and only Josh Koscheck, and for some reason Robbie Lawler seemed different than usual after nearly separating Bobby Volker's head from his shoulders.
Bobby ran a Mack truck through his face.
This dude stood up to pose like a supervillain. These little bits of savagery propelled his popularity even further, and after beating Rary, he was awarded a shot at the empty throne. GSP had recently vacated the welterweight championship, and so Lawler faced the most recent challenger, Johnny Hendricks, in the main event of UFC 171. This marked the beginning of a short-lived yearly tradition. Robbie Lawler leaving it all inside the Octagon. In a fight of the year at 171, Robbie Lawler was not able to beat Johnny Hendricks, but he came close, real close, and with 2 quick victories, Lawler was back in the cage with Hendricks. And this time around, he walked out as champion, but only barely. Majority of the media scored in favor of Hendricks, but a trilogy belt was unlikely. And Lawler, now champion, geared up for his first title defense. What a bloodbath that was. It was UFC 189. The lights were bright, the stage was set.
He's a little 5'2" twerp, and I'm gonna slap the face off him, and that's it.
The world was waiting for the Conor McGregor coronation, but the calming that stole the show. It was brutal, almost uncomfortable at times, and both fighters wound up disfigured, but ultimately, it was the champion who won split lip and bloody mess, and all this gored clash at UFC 189 was awarded the fight of the year, and Robbie Lawler was a component for the second time in a row. But you have to be winding down. Robbie McDonald was never the same guy after the damage he sustained, and neither was Robbie Lawler, but he was still the champion and had to defend. The next title challenger was fellow veteran Carlos Condit. In hindsight, this was a fitting end, as Condit was like a mirror image of Robbie, just as light, just as weathered, and just as ruthless.
Well, one of the things, I threw a spinning back fist or something. He told me, so we're throwing spinning shit now? And I kind of just, I had to crack a smile at that one and just told him, yep.
It was the power of Robbie Lawler versus the volume of Carlos Condit. And while it was a competitive fight, Condit seemed to be the guy with the edge. But in the fifth round, Robbie Lawler was unleashed, perhaps for the final time. Condit was uniquely durable, but while it came this close to knocking him out, and with that insane barrage, he ended up winning the fifth round and the fight, but again, just barely, much like the second Hendricks fight. The decision was controversial, but with the third straight fight of the year in a row, One Earth was going to boo this man, from a failed UFC prospect, a bloated middleweight, to a two-time defending UFC champion, in my opinion. The best career resurgence of all time, but that conduct fight drained whatever was left. If the Rory fight was the pinnacle,
I definitely don't want to have to do that every fight.
Conduct fight was the dying gasp. We knew Robbie was not the same fighter who would be after 10 years of fighting and 3 years of absolute war, but he got past UFC 195 notched. His second title defense, that was all. Can I just end it here? The championship reign of Robbie Lawler came to an end at UFC 201, and Tyron Willie was the guy to beat him. From that point on, Robbie Lawler was no longer ruthless, far slower, and less willing to march his opponents down. He went 2-5 in his next 7 fights, and each loss was almost painful to watch from time to time. We did see glimpses of the old Robbie Lawler, but yeah, that 3-fight stretch was just too much. Robbie Lawler was not the best fighter technically speaking, but he found success by beating the hell out of his opponent.
That's the kind of power that Robbie Lawler brings to the octagon.
He also got the hell beaten out of himself. It was entertaining as hell, but it came at a price. I don't know how he managed to win a single fight after UFC 189, but he was just that tough that toughness got him the world title and pushed him through 2 defenses at UFC 290. Robbie Lawler will make his final walk to the Octagon. Nico Price will be his last opponent. He has been at it for over 20 years now, and while his best days are long behind, the bloody glory of this gladiator will live on forever. I hope you enjoyed. I gotta bounce. I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace out.